Hey, what's going on? My name is Faris Sabeti, co-founder and CEO of MySwimPro, and in today's video, I'm going to share with you guys the hard questions that all entrepreneurs need to ask themselves in their business. These are questions that apply for any type of company, whether you're a technology company, e-commerce, brick and mortar. Regardless of the business, there are some fundamentals that you need to nail down, and especially in a time like today, it is April 2020, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Regardless of a pandemic or not, you need to ask these hard questions to understand the fundamentals of your business so that way you can make the necessary pivots to continue to grow and scale. I want to give a huge shout out to Sohail, the founder of Mixpanel, who actually tweeted a lot of the different things that I'm going to talk about in this video around finance, team traction, and other. Huge shout out to all the different business leaders in the community who are trying to share their knowledge and help other companies. That is where I got a lot of this information that I use for my own business. Also, if you're interested, check out the video that I did, how to pivot in a pandemic, where I share in more detail what we're doing at MySwimPro to pivot the business and adapt to the market landscape that is changing literally by the hour. Without further ado, the first thing to focus on is the finances. You need to ask yourself 5 critical questions about your business. And in some companies, in some cases, actually every team member should know the answer to a lot of these questions as well. But for you as a CEO, the founder, the entrepreneur, you definitely need to know the answer to these. The first question, how much money is in the bank? This is like your baseline. Cash is king. Even if you're not on a cash basis, cash flow is the name of the game, especially in challenging times, in a pandemic or not. You need to know exactly how much cash is in the bank. You need to know how much money did you spend on average over the last 3 months. This is really a best estimate based on the prior 3 months, which can predict the next 3 months. Of course, on the revenue side, things can change dramatically, especially in the time of a pandemic. But you need to know how much money are you spending in the last month. That could be on your team, your marketing expense, if you have fixed costs like owning a building, rent, all those things come into play. Third, how much money did you make in the last 3 months? Now, this is going to pivot and change a lot if the market is changing. You need to ask yourself, what is your gross margin? So this fluctuates significantly based on the kind of business. If you're technology, maybe it's 70, 80, 90, 95% gross margin. Maybe if you're e-commerce, it's a little bit lower than that, brick and mortar. Of course, the margins become a lot smaller if you have to do serving a physical good. Is it feasible to raise cash on a reasonable time frame and a reasonable valuation? If you're a tech company, will you be able to raise cash from your existing investors? Can you raise new money? Is that going to come out in a loan? What format of financing would you be able to do? And what are the terms of that? And do they make sense given your current financial position? These are questions that you should know the answer to all the time, 24/7. I have an example here that breaks out a few different scenarios for an example business. Now, we talk about the cash in the bank, revenue, all that. Think about option A. This is like when times are good. This is, we're talking about a run even, meaning how much time do you have until money runs out in the bank. This is cash flow break even. So let's assume we have $100,000 in the bank. The average monthly revenue is $50,000 in this business. Average monthly burn is $25,000. And now the gross margin is 50%, meaning of the $50,000 that we're making in revenue, we're really only keeping 50% of that, for whatever reason, whether it's commission or some other expense, excluded from the monthly burn. So if we make $50,000, 50% of it we're not going to see. So that means we're really gross making about $25,000. Our burn is $25,000. Therefore, the net profit is $0. So that's actually not a bad scenario to be in. It means your cash flow break even. So your runway, theoretically, the time it takes for you to run out of money completely is indefinite. You're not going to run out of money because you're making just as much money as you're burning. You have $100,000 in the bank as a cushion to manage the business. That's pretty good. Could you raise extra cash? Potentially, maybe you could raise $100,000 to $200,000, maybe more. Maybe it's from the bank, maybe it's from venture capital, maybe it's a rich uncle, something like that. You can theoretically raise money in this scenario, regardless of the kind of business that you have. Now, let's say it's not amazing and we're in the pandemic, so you're probably looking at option B or C more realistically. So let's forget about option A. Some of the constants will carry over. You still have $100,000 in the bank. No one's taking your money just because it's a pandemic. But your revenue is going to take a hit. Now, the amount of a hit that you're going to see is pretty variable based on the business that you have. Some businesses, a very, very small amount of them, are actually seeing their business booming in this crazy time, crazy economy. But for most, their business is going to take a hit just from consumer spending in general, whether it's on the business side or the consumer side, or if you have a restaurant, unfortunately, you're probably closed. So your revenue is definitely going to take a hit. Your monthly burn, assuming you don't let anyone go, will probably stay pretty constant to where it was. Now, this can fluctuate a lot depending on the type of business that you have, but let's say it's going to maintain at $25,000. Now, your gross margin, depending on what you do, is probably going to stay the same as well, so we'll keep that at 50%. Will you be able to raise more cash? I don't know. Maybe. There's a good chance you could. There's a good chance you couldn't. New economic stimulus package, if you're in the United States, has come out recently. But for the most part, you're probably not going to be in the same position as you were in option A. So what does that mean from a profitability standpoint? Well, if you maintained your expenses, but now you're making less revenue, you're going to end up seeing a net profit of negative $12,500. So you're burning about 12 to 13K per month, keeping that 50% margin. So what does that mean from a runway perspective? It means you're going to run out of cash in 8 months. If something doesn't change drastically, whether you're cutting your expenses, making more revenue, it doesn't really change the math. You have a fixed amount in the bank, and there's only a certain amount of time until you run out of cash. These are fundamentals that you need to know, whether it's a pandemic or not, or a tough situation, economy, because by knowing this, now it allows you to be in a position to make the changes necessary to the team, the different traction, and other things, so that way you can prevent the business from running out of cash, which is how the business fails ultimately. Option C is sort of the worst case scenario where your revenue goes to absolutely zero. So you're not making any money, still have 100K in the bank. You're burning 25,000. You still didn't let anyone go. You're maintaining all the business pieces. Gross margin doesn't even apply anymore because you're not making any revenue. Can you raise cash? It's highly unlikely. There are different forms of capital that you could raise if you're not making any money, if you have a prior track record, business entity established, you were making money, you have cash in the bank, you're a competent entrepreneur in some capacity, right? So there is a possibility. So I don't think the X is like complete no, but it's going to be a lot harder, no question about it, a lot harder. And most likely, if you're in option C, if you're in that category, there's a lot of other companies and businesses competing for the same amount of capital. So unfortunately, capital raise is probably not going to be a high possibility. It might. And your net profit, you're going to be burning now your full expenses, $25,000 a month. If you have 100K in the bank, you are cut down to 4 months of runway. Now, there's a lot more that can play into this, but fundamentally, you need to ask yourself these 5 questions on the financial side to get you to that different scenario mapping, so that way you can make the changes that you need. Changes could be on your team. Now, obviously, you don't want to let anyone go, but you need to do what you need to do to maintain the growth of the business. So you need to think, how many team members do you have? How many do you need? How many do you need across marketing, sales? Who is essential to hire? Maybe you need to actually hire, you need to expand. Maybe you can't afford to freeze your hiring because you need to bring in new people to bring in new revenue that you don't have anymore. So who's hiring? Who are you going to hire in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? If you're in a pandemic, you might put that on freeze. You might need to look at that a little bit more critically. And the third question here is, what function or team is struggling but needs to be successful? So this could be the product team, it could be the sales team, it could be a delivery team if you have a service, it could be a specific group of people that their performance is essential to the business. And if they're not performing, if they're struggling, why is that? So these are some tough questions you really need to understand and think about on literally a daily basis when you run a company. And then from a traction perspective, ties into some of the finances, how has growth been like in the last 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? You have to be brutally honest, so you can't fluff the numbers. The only person you're lying to is yourself. You have to look at the numbers. What have we done in the last 3 months, 6 months? What can we reasonably anticipate in the next 3 months, 6 months? Think about these different scenarios that we talked about. You might think you're in option A today, but you have to understand what happens if we move to option B from any kind of a market shift, consumer shift, anything can happen. What happens if we slip to option C? You should have each of these scenarios mapped out. And then, do you have product market fit and why? That'll dictate how fast you might be able to grow and scale up if you add more team members or let team members go. If you don't have product market fit, you should be working on that continuously. And then the second question here relative to this video and the timing, do you have pandemic product market fit? The best example of this is My Swim Pro. I would argue My Swim Pro in March of 2020 did have some level of product market fit. When you shut down 95% of pools around the world, our company does not have product market fit because no one can use your product. So in a pandemic time, the product market fit means something different. So for us, we've had to pivot. Again, check out that video linked in the description, how we're pivoting the company to adapt to the changing landscape. A few other things to consider. What is your team's chemistry like? As the leader, it's your job to set the vision, recruit the team, and then make sure you have enough money in the bank. So it's really important that the chemistry amongst your team and with yourself and other leaders in the company makes a lot of sense, and you guys are working on continuously improving that. Another question here is, what % of your team is the product or service or building the thing that you're actually selling? And what percentage is sales and marketing? That ties into the finances again, thinking about, have we achieved that product market fit? What team do we have in place? What is the expense of that team? What is the expense of the sales and marketing? And how does that dictate the next steps we're going to take by being brutally honest with the traction that you've had in the last 3 months and projecting out into the next 3 months into the future? What are your roadblocks from moving faster? If you're early stage, speed is the name of the game. If it's a pandemic, you have to move even faster. In this case, it's pretty weird in 2020 because it is not necessarily a sprint. It's a marathon, but you have to have sustained speed over the course of the marathon. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart a lot faster. In these examples, if you're not category C, you only have 4 months to act. Honestly, you're already late if you're at this point and you haven't done anything yet. If you're in option B, you have a little bit more time, but the key is having that speed. So what are the roadblocks that are preventing you from moving faster? And it's your job as a leader to get rid of those roadblocks. I want to stress 2 main things here. This is all about leadership. And again, shout out to the founders online on Twitter. This is awesome. I'll link this tweet actually where a lot of this was explained in the description. But the first is you need to focus on empathy and compassion first, and then the business second, because ultimately if it's more than just yourself, you have a team. So you have to make sure that you're compassionate and empathetic. Don't forget about the business. But first, you need to prioritize your team, and then you can worry about a lot of the stuff that we talked about. And second, focus on the truth. Build trust, build transparency, not only with your team, but with yourself. If you fudge any of these numbers, it's not helping anybody. So you have to be brutally honest. You have to focus on the truth of the facts, especially in the pandemic when there's a lot of different noise on the news and the media, what other entrepreneurs are doing. So make sure you really focus on what you're doing, what you can control. Don't fudge any of the financial numbers. A few other things to keep an eye on. Think about community, meaning find the other entrepreneurs who are in your space, figure out what they're doing, watch what they're doing, and learn from them. Listen to your team, listen to your customers. Your team members all have a different perspective, so by meeting with all of them at some regular cadence, you can get an idea of what's going on in their mind, and they can share that perspective. Of course, your customers, if you don't have product market fit, your customers are the ones who are going to give you that product market fit. If you don't have pandemic product market fit, you've got to adapt and you got to figure out how am I going to get to pandemic product market fit, and you're going to do that with your customers. And then networking with the right people. Add me on LinkedIn. Follow the leaders that I'll put in my description right here. Make sure you're following the right people so that way you can learn. But stay true to your gut, stay true to your business. Not every business is the same. Some of these are fundamental that are true in any time for any business. Other things that are more specific might depend on your industry, on your product, on your team, on you, the entrepreneur. So there's no one size fits all in any of this. Again, I hope this video was helpful in shaping how you can think about these different hard questions to ask yourself as an entrepreneur, founder. If you thought this video was helpful, give it a bookmark, like, and subscribe to my channel. I'll also mention 2 other videos that I did you might be interested. I also mentioned how to pivot in a pandemic, what we're doing at our company, My Swim Pro. I hope that's helpful for you guys. That's going to be linked in the description. Also, how to run a remote company. I share 10 tips for entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs who have never run a remote company, or maybe you've already done it. We've been doing it for over 5 years at My Swim Pro. We're spread over 10 different time zones. I will link that in the description. And of course, make sure you're staying home, stay safe in this crazy pandemic of 2020. And again, I hope you guys find this video helpful. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.